Hey guys, welcome back to the Compost Pile, your source for all things gardening, homesteading, and more. Today, I'm back again with Paul Lemoine, and we're going to talk about getting ready to plant tomatoes. So, right now, it's January. It's still really early, but depending on what you're doing, when you like to plant, you got to start getting prepared. And we're going to give you a general overview of planting tomatoes in Southeast Texas, Zone 9A, and talk about varieties, different types of growth habits, maybe some general care and some things to be mindful of so that you can be more successful this season and get a good crop. So, tomatoes, I mean, honestly, it's the number one grown crop in home gardening, especially here with such a warm season, but also a very tricky season for growing because we there's so many variables that we can experience. What when do you generally like to start planting out tomatoes in a raised bed or in the ground?
Okay, that's like the number one most important thing about tomatoes. And first off, I usually plant my tomatoes by seed,
Okay.
and I will do that January the 1st,
Okay.
almost without fail. And it may be a day before, a day after, but somewhere close to January 1st.
And you're doing that because you need at least like 6 to 8 weeks to get them at a minimum size to be able to move out into
That's right.
A bed or in a garden. But I've known you to grow them larger and up pot them so that you have maybe a hardier, beefier plant to put out that might be more prone to survive some of the environmental shock that we might get during the early times.
Plenty of that, and in about 5 days I have them coming up, and as soon as I start seeing some true leaves, and let me back up, so people may not know, you got the seed leaves as the first two little leaves, and then your true leaves will be coming right after that, and sometime right in there I'll up pot those to 4-inch pots, and at that point then when I'm watering them, I start watering them with a mixture of some microlife, and I usually use the seaweed, the green, and that's to really enhance that root development.
Right.
And it gives them a little bit, because once you get in those big pots, they're starting to get hungry. They'll grow. They'll grow a lot faster than you think they will. And I got to back up when I'm, after I plant these seeds, once they come up, then I'm using lights, of course, on just a wire rack, and I put the light right on top, and I let the light follow the growth of the seedlings.
Right.
And so I got to just change. It's simple stuff. I just move it up a hook, and sometimes I'll even touch the light, and I just keep moving it up. And then my target date to actually bring them outside and plant them is usually the 3rd or the 4th week of February.
Okay.
And by that time, I have up potted those into quart pots. And if I kept them too much longer in there, then I'm fixing to have to go to gallon pots.
Gallon pots,
and then you're talking tons of potting soil.
Yeah.
When you're planting, or I usually seed 75 or 80 of them.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, I share a lot. I got buddies that, hey man, make sure you plant me some Bella Roses this year and plant me some Brandywines this year, and so I always do extra, and I do it as a fallback just in case we get some, apocalyptic snow or cold spell where I couldn't save them, or whatever, or a flood or whatever, Then I got some. So even after I plant mine, I keep those, and I keep them going indoors or in my shop or whatever, and then I may even start hardening them off. And I guess we'll probably cover the hardening off part, but so I like to try to get them in the ground the 3rd to 4th week of February, and it's twofold reason. Number one is the quicker you can get those tomatoes to produce fruit, and generally at that time I've already had flowers on them then, and they're 18 inches to 2 foot at that particular point, and then and another thing I'm trying to beat is the heat. If you plant these seedlings spring break, a lot of people like spring break. They plant their tomatoes and little plants like that, and then they're bumping up to them 90-degree temperatures. They're fighting stink bugs then and all kind of other pests and the heat. And once it hits 90, as you know, they're not going to set fruit very well.
Right.
if
Yeah.
at all.
Once you kind of, growing up, I was always told, once kind of the nighttime temperatures really hit in the mid 70s, then
Yeah.
you're typically at that point in time the humidity at that time of year is elevated. It's higher,
Yep.
and because that tomato plant is a self-pollinating plant, then the pollen is not going to drop,
Right.
and it stays sticky. So then you can have all the blooms you want, but then you're not going to get any production.
That's
So,
right.
and that's the number one mistake that I see is timing. And
Yep.
people always think, oh, like February's too early, like the cold. But I'm finding more and more that getting them out in the ground early and having a system to be able to protect them
Yep.
in the event that we get these cold snaps like last year we put some out even earlier, the earliest I've ever done, just as an experiment behind the office.
Yeah.
I put them out on February 6th. We got a cold snap 1 week later, and I covered them. I made me a little frame and I covered
Right.
them up, and I captured the heat with it, and I lost one plant out of 8, and they recovered. So, but if I wouldn't have had that in place, then I would have been like you. I'd have been going back to some of my backup plants,
Backup plans, right?
because they would have been toast. They would have been gone.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, that's a big reason. So overall, and another thing, I'm gonna back up a little bit. As I uppot my plants, I'm also running a little small oscillating fan or something like that. Periodically
Okay.
blowing on these little seedlings. They look like they're blowing up. Well, in nature, of course, that's how things get stronger.
Right.
And when I'm planting my tomatoes in the ground, they're as big as my thumb. That's how big the stalks
Yeah,
are. They're super hardy, just like they've been working out. And so you get them out there, and you put them in the ground, and when I do put them in the ground, I put a cage around them that I make out of the concrete wire that's 2 foot in diameter.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 foot. And then I wrap some plastic at the bottom of it, and I keep my plastic. I use it every year, same stuff. It's 18 inches to 24 inches tall, and I wrap it around, and I clip it or tape it on there, and I put that over the plant. So what that's going to do is it's going to keep that cold wind off of it, and it's going to create not really a greenhouse effect, but that soil will warm 10 or 15 degrees more than your ambient temperature and hold that heat. And so they'll thrive. I mean, in a few days, you start seeing the tops coming out of that
Growing,
plastic.
yeah.
Even when it's cool, and they're thriving in that.
That's
And I mean, it's like probably the number one thing that makes those plants so much stronger and better when I do that. So I mean, that's the key.
yeah. Okay.
And I don't care if it's cold when I do it. As soon as I put them on the ground, I put that plastic cage on there, and it's gonna, between the 3rd or 4th week of February and the end of March, we're gonna have a cold snap.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt.
And
It may not be a frost,
but it's still going to be
something that may knock them back, but
Yep.
it won't knock these back.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And one thing I always like to make sure people remember, if you're going to put plastic around a plant, to make sure like you've created a structure so it's off of the plant. If you've got
Oh, yeah.
plastic touching your plant, especially in a cold event, and it's not done properly. And yours, you got a way for heat to escape out of it, so you're not basically baking these plants like they're in a greenhouse. So
No, it doesn't go completely down to the dirt.
okay,
It's close.
yeah. So, but it's
And if I got a cold spell coming, what I do is I'll start working the dirt around there to seal it off.
seal
at
it
the bottom,
off, yeah,
and then I can throw something over the top
top
of the
of
cage.
it, and everything.
If it's
so
gonna be a
basically-
frost.
So you've got a surround around the
Yeah.
plant. You got the heat trapped in.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's worked great with no fail. And the plastic I'm using now, I probably used for 5 or 6 years. I bought one roll of plastic from one of the local box stores, and just cut it up and to the size that would go around and overlap a little bit, clip it on there, and then usually I take the plastic off when your daily highs or close to 80 degrees. So
Okay.
75 to 80 degrees, we're consistently getting that. I take the plastic off, because then you will
Then
you will start baking them if you leave it on there. 'Cause it gets hot inside of them.
and the hotter, it's going to use more
Yeah.
water. And,
Right. So usually that's probably around the first week of April I end up taking it off. So it's probably on there a month to 6 weeks
Okay.
total. And I take it off, roll it back up, stick it in the bag, and get ready for next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whenever we're planting out like tomatoes and such, You go and you look, like if say you're going to go out and you're going to buy a transplant, or even if you're buying seeds, there's so many options out there now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unthinkable the amount of varieties. But oftentimes, one of the most important decisions for me, for growers, is deciding the actual growth habit of the variety that you're going at. Sometimes I think
Right.
that's more important than the actual variety, especially if somebody's just starting out. So you kind of have two classifications of tomatoes. You have indeterminate and you have determinate.
Right.
And when you go out and you look at a plant or a seed, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to tell you that on a tag, on a packet. So it's something that I always encourage people to look up, learn a little bit about a variety before they plant it. So that way they make sure when they go put it in the ground, they actually have everything ready. Because your determinant is going to be more compact, more bush-like. It's not necessarily a bush, but it's gonna grow smaller, and it also is going to set most of its fruit all at one time. So it's going to be a shorter window of growing. For some people, that might be great. For people that only want to harvest once and then be done. But then on the other hand, you have indeterminate. Those are going to be vining, very leggy. They're going to need far more support. You see people grow them with string lines or very robust cages.
Right.
But they're going to produce over that extended time. What do you find works best for you?
I like a variety. So I would say most of the varieties I plant, or I may be about 50-50 now.
Okay.
I used to be probably 90-10. I would grow one indeterminate and I grow a bunch of determinates, but then I could fill this room with all the tomatoes because, like I said, they're going to set fruit pretty much, or they're going to, you're going to harvest them all about the same amount of time.
And
then it's over with,
And you also, if you, depending on how many you planted, you got to be prepared to do something with
Yes.
that, or you just took everything, all those inputs and time you put in, and
It's like, it's over with.
Yeah,
So what happened? I spent all this time, all this work, planting them seeds and all that. Now it's over with. So, but I have incorporated some heirloom varieties that I like to grow, and I like to try one new variety every season of some type of tomato. I'll find one that I hadn't seen, which, like you said, there's so many.
I think
It's
important.
easy to do.
It's experimentation,
Yeah. And then, but I like some indeterminates too. And you were right when it takes a more robust type of caging system or trellis or whatever. I've actually had to put 2 5-foot cages on top of each other.
Okay.
Because I'll chase them. They want to grow that far, let them go.
Let them go, yeah.
Yeah, I love some indeterminates too. Especially on even like your cherry type tomatoes,
Right.
like your sun golds or something like that. Whatever you find that's indeterminate, those things keep growing and you keep picking the fruit off.
That's
of
what
them.
we try to grow, like a lot of our cherries up a trellis.
I love that
You know,
like that. It's neat looking, and they'll even climb on the top, start going back down the other side
Yep.
too. If you have that, so you got to determine. The application of that is, how are you set up for growing tomatoes? You may not be set up to be able to deal with indeterminate.
And you have to be prepared, because I can speak to that firsthand, because I stay super busy. So like a lot of times I'm putting things in as I have time. And last year I put in some tomatoes, and I needed some a new support system for them, and I didn't have it, and I put it off, and when it all came down to it, I was just able to undo a square cage and put it in there, and it went through it and kept it up off the ground, but eventually it was all over the ground, and it still produced fine, but it was a nightmare to work around. I had one whole row in between beds I couldn't walk through.
Oh wow!
Just because it was all over the place, and that's just it's a good lesson learned, and it's a lesson I already knew the answer to, but I just you got to be prepared, and you need to have those things like ready before you start. I think, and that's hard in this day and age.
Oh, it is, because usually you're thinking, man, I should have got stuff ready last week. Now I need it, yesterday, and another thing is, so you got to know your location where you're doing it, and I'll go back to the person that has an apartment or a balcony or something like that. There's some great varieties out there, like Super Bush or something that are a good container tomato plant that somebody could grow, just a single one or whatever. If that's all you can do, you can still
get a decent
still
harvest.
Get some tomatoes out of it, or something like that. And if you do have a little old trellis system, you can grow you an indeterminate, and you have salad tomatoes for a pretty good while if you
Yeah.
take care of them. So yeah, there's a lot of varieties out there.
So not only do we have to like consider like the growth habit, we need to consider like the type, whether it be like an open pollinated or heirloom variety, or maybe a hybrid. There's some drastic differences there. You talked about in our last episode, you mentioned you like growing brandy wines, but you don't get a great crop every year. Um, why why is that the case? And what do you see as a benefit of growing an heirloom versus a hybrid?
The challenge.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, that's one of them. So yeah, so like a very popular tomato here is Celebrity or Celebrity Plus because they've been bred to be resistant to so many pathogens and pests and stuff like that. And so for somebody that's really not wanting to really dive into it, that's a very good one to plant. Makes a nice medium slicing tomato. It's resistant to a lot of things. It's very hardy. And that's a good one for somebody that's kind of say, well, I don't really have a green thumb. Well, that's a good one to plant.
Yeah, and that truthfully is still, as long as I've been in this business, that is the Southeast Texas go
That's
to.
it. That's it. It used to be the Gulf States tomato
Yep,
when I was growing up.
Yep.
And
remember
I still plant some of those. I have some seeds and Creoles and stuff like that. But anyhow, that's a really good one with lower maintenance that homeowners can grow. But the flavor profile, even though it's 100 times better than something you buy at the grocery store,
Absolutely.
it's not the same flavor profile as a brandy wine or a Chianti Rose, which is a cross between a brandy wine and some unknown Italian secret tomato that we still hadn't figured out what it is. Don and I have been trying to figure out which one they cross it with, but that's another good one. But that's a real beefy, big tomato, but the flavor profile is just out of this world. You'll never taste one better.
So the heirlooms, people always say the heirlooms, the taste is incredible, but you some people will go and they'll grow it and they'll get one tomato. So the challenges that the heirlooms bring, and this may work elsewhere, unhinged, and you may get great production, but here in the climate that we work with, being so volatile, hot, humid, a lot of the heirloom varieties are just not well suited for production. So that's something you got to keep in mind if you're limited on space. You don't want to be growing something that because you're not going to get your money's worth. And gardening's already hard enough to get your money's worth out of sometimes anyway. But hybrids are bred to have those resistances, like you said. And I always like to preface that a hybrid often gets confused with a GMO, but the average homeowner like me and you can't even get access to a GMO seed. Most of those are for large agriculture, and a hybrid is just two varieties that have been cross-pollinated to get the best part of the natural genetics, like a disease resistance, maybe a nematode resistance, maybe this one performs better in hot temperatures or hotter climates. So you're basically getting something that is crossbred and that isn't going to happen naturally very quickly.
Right.
So
and so when you're talking about hybrids, and of course I grow plenty of hybrids and I love growing them, and it's not one you're going to save seeds for to replant to get a crop, even if you had a volunteer or something. So but as far as ease of doing that, they're great. And then your heirlooms, that's a good seed saver one if you want to save them. But get back to the brandy wines. Brandy wines were more for zones probably 6 and 7, maybe 8. But last year we had a late kind of a cool spring, and the brandy wines thrived. I mean, brandy wines.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. But if you have a typical spring where it's kind of cool in March and come April you start hitting 80s and stuff. That's why I try to get the brandy wines out. That's the first seed I plant. I want those ready early that you try to take advantage of that cooler weather. So about once every 3 years, sometimes 2 years, sometimes maybe only 5 years, you get the right conditions to have a really nice crop. Well, I've already spent, if you start January the 1st on that plant, and then you're trying to get production sometime around the 1st of April. I mean, I got 4 months invested in those plants. They're beautiful too.
Yeah.
They're great looking. All of a sudden, then you get the wrong weather and you've lost it. You know, so yeah, you don't want to put a
can be
whole bunch of
disheartening,
time
so,
in a bunch of
yeah.
them, but I still, it's that challenge deal, and I don't know. You know, it's fun to do that. See if you can make it, because they said you can't grow brandywines in here. I said, watch me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do it.
You know, you can. There's so many different ways you can mimic and change
Yeah.
the environment, and you know, you mentioned earlier how you put the fan, to help strengthen the stems. You know, when you're setting these out in the garden, one of the biggest challenges we face here is diseases like early or late blight. That
Oh, yeah.
there's no cure for those things. You can't go to the store and buy something to take care of it. You have to take care of it with your cultural practices, whether it be pruning lower leaves, making sure you have airflow. So that's I think that's really important to relate to variety selection, because you need to make sure you have a decent spacing. And if you don't, or you are going to challenge your spacing and plant tight spacings, you've got to be able to prune them to allow air to get through there.
That's a good point you brought up. It's a very, very important point. Almost as much as watering properly.
Yeah.
Is because like whenever I transplant from whatever pot I have it, either quart pot or 4 inch or whatever, and you put it in the ground, the first thing I do, I'll start snapping off a couple of those bottom branches.
As they go, yeah.
And then I'll plant them a little bit deeper than what they were in the pot, but I'll make sure I don't plant it so deep that those branches are touching the soil
Yeah,
surface.
because a lot of people don't realize that a lot of those diseases or like blights, they start as a pathogen in the soil.
Yep.
And while ideally you want to water at the soil level so you're not splashing water and soil up onto those lower leaves.
Yep.
So removing them is going to prevent some of that, but oftentimes it happens naturally just with heavy rainfall. There's Mother Nature you can't control.
No, you can't control that,
But,
right?
so keeping those lower tier leaves off can help mitigate some of that possibility of disease transferring onto a plant, because once it's there, you've just got to kind of do your best to control it and control the variables. So maybe you'll get something out of it and you may not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that pruning doesn't just stop when you plant it, because as I see anything start touching the ground, or if I see that you get like a lot of people's heard about picking the suckers,
Yeah.
plucking the suckers, stuff like that. If that's the one I'll cut that off as I'm going. If I see it's just jam packed tight in there, well, I'm gonna start removing some lower limbs that are non-producing, just to give it some airflow.
Yep.
Because you can mitigate a lot of that splash up from your rainfall by having that air being able to move in there. So yeah, you can plant them tight in your raised bed. That's no problem. You still need to make sure that you open it up enough where it gets some air going through there.
That's one of my favorite uses of like helping prevent like the splashing of the soil is, we always, we've decreased like disease, moving up onto leaves, especially on larger leaves like cucumbers and stuff later on in the season, by putting a thick layer of pine straw and having that airy, fluffy texture, unlike a regular mulch, that disease could potentially move into. So we help kind of have that barrier of protection from splashing. But it's also important when you are watering, make sure you're not watering overhead, because that's one of the fastest ways to get those issues started going along.
I'm glad you brought up pine straw. I've kind of discovered that pine straw mulch in the last 3 years or so, and we use it heavily in the Master Gardener's test garden. And I've seen that stuff work. It's amazing. You're thinking when you first put it out there, it's real fluffy, and you're thinking that's not going to stop any weeds. But in just a little while, it compacts itself and creates like a barrier that breathes.
Yeah, and that's
but when that rain hits it, there's nothing to splash.
Nope. That's one thing I love about it. And I'll pile it up around things like lower leaves and stuff to keep things off the ground. So when I am watering, it's not laying in water, depending on what it is. But it's a very underutilized option.
Not by this guy, because I'm actually doubling, tripling up on that.
Yeah.
I've seen the benefits of it. I'm gonna use a lot more of it.
So once you get yours out in the ground, what's kind of your general care regiment that you like to do? So obviously, we're feeding the soil. We want to make sure that our plants have plenty of nutrition. But what what do you use? Maybe not, doesn't have to necessarily be a specific product, but like,
Yeah.
how do you go about providing your inputs and things throughout the season as you're waiting
Yeah.
for production?
Yeah. So after my initial planting, which I'm actually feeding them at planting, and so they're coming out of a pot that has potting soil in there,
Right.
and then I'm incorporating the native soil, and I don't mind naming brands because I use almost strictly Microlife products, and because it's organic and it's time released, and so I'll always dig a hole quite a bit bigger than a tomato and incorporate a little bit of Microlife in there, and then and put my plant in. And that's another very important thing about tomatoes. You can plant those things as deep as you want to, just about.
It's one of the few plants, all the little hairs on the stem
All can make roots.
Can make roots. So
and I can attest to that after I try to get them up. My root system is so deep, and that's what you want. And so I won't plant them at the level they were in a pot. I'll always move up and pull a couple of the lower limbs off and plant them deep. It gives them stability, and encourages that good root system. So. And then after that, I won't feed again normally until I just see the little bitty tomatoes popping on there. And then I'll give them a good balanced fertilizer like your Microlife, or there's some other good tomato foods out there. But I tend to stick with Microlife, and I may occasionally use some liquid to give them a quick feed. If I see something that's looking like maybe they're stressed some reason or another, I may give them an application of some Microlife in my watering regimen.
Yeah.
I don't have an injector system on my drip tape that I put out.
So we'll do some liquid applications, here and there throughout the season, and we'll do them with of course I'm just doing a handful of raised beds.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm using just a watering can, mixing it in,
That's all I do.
because I'm not in a hurry, so I got time to make a few batches and make it work.
Right. And I'm a precise measurer. It's like
Yeah.
a couple splashes of this, look down there and kind of smell the fish emulsion or whatever. That's about right. And so anyhow, yeah. And so I like a liquid application. You'll see some initial, some quick results with that. But long term, I like to incorporate that the Microlife there. So side dressing, and then I try to keep it weed free. At least in the cage system itself.
Okay.
With that 2-foot area around there, because I know any weeds are going to be competing for nutrients with the tomatoes themselves, and the mulching really, really helps with that. After that initial weeding, and it helps conserve moisture. And when it does get hot, it keeps a little bit cooler there, which to keep that moisture from evaporating. But one of the most important things with tomatoes is the deep watering of them. Whether you're using a drip system or something like that at the ground, you got to do a deep watering on them. You want those roots that are going down deep, looking for the water. You do a light watering, you're going to get more ground level roots, and you're going to lose that moisture a lot quicker that way.
And as it gets hotter, if you're not on top of your game, you're not going to be watering enough.
And you can't water that.
Yeah.
You can't water enough like that. So, and drip system, which are easy to do and are very inexpensive to do, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
And plus, you're not watering everything else.
It's the most. It's the most eco-conscious way to water because you're not wasting water.
You don't use much water.
No,
you really don't.
No, it's we still water with a wand, but I could. But that's just I enjoy doing it most of the time.
That is kind of waxing.
So, but I'll just stand there and
stick down to the base with
and just
let
watch,
flow.
and I'll just be looking around, observing what else is going on around, and actually, my garden's in the front yard, so oftentimes somebody's walking by, I get to talk to somebody. So it's kind of become a regiment. But I'm watering. I'll just kind of put my nozzle through the pine straw, make sure I'm kind of at the soil level, and I'll just kind of gently, low and slow, like let it flood the bed, and I'll make sure that everywhere is kind of saturated, and I can start seeing that color change in the soil. And I'm always going to put my hand in the dirt, making sure that I got water down deep enough, because that's, like you said, often people just give it a quick
looks wet on top and leave it
20-30 seconds here and there, and it's not enough in the grand scheme of things. So what what other issues have you had come up? Have you ever had issues with like splitting?
Hmm. Splitting, blossom end rot, things like that. Now, I will say this: as I've transitioned some of my tomatoes to the raised beds, I have a lot less issues in the raised bed. And again, we can go back to the drainage issues and all that kind of stuff when we had these gully washers.
Yeah.
And you got them in ground. Next thing you can look for is tomato end rot because you're washing that calcium out of that
Yep,
soil.
and that's, I mean, most times like people think that blossom end rot is a calcium deficiency. Well, it's a calcium deficiency within the plant itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there's no calcium in the soil. For us here, because the climate, it's either too wet and it's washing it out of the root zone, or on the other hand, it could even be too dry and it's not soluble. It can't absorb it. So oftentimes your blossom end rot is totally weather or environment related, or maybe if you're overwatering or underwatering, you could be contributing to that as well.
You could,
but it's not often.
It'd be hard for somebody. I mean, you really, the old way my dad taught me, you throw the hose down the middle, let the row in between fill up, and go to the next one. And I can remember back then we had some blossom end rot problems, but I see less of that in the raised bed applications as opposed to in ground because you're able to control those things a lot.
That's and splitting kind of comes from the same thing. It's all about water.
And there's some times where when it gets really hot, you could put a shade cloth for that evening hot sun and maybe mitigate some and make them last a little longer, carry them through the summer a little longer. You can do that. I've done it.
I can definitely speak to that. Like the beds that we have at home are underneath 4 oaks, so they're under an oak canopy. They get filtered morning sun, and 2 beds get a hint of afternoon sun. From about like 1 to 2:30, they'll get a little bit, and then after that, it's behind the trees on the other side. And it's pretty incredible to see the production that I get of what most people would qualify as not full sun,
right?
Because it's the water usage is far more consistent, the nutrient usage is far more consistent, and the plants are just generally less stressed. And I've seen my best harvest of any time I've ever grown in this particular garden, and I attribute a lot of that to that a little bit element of shade. Mm-hmm. So it does go a long way.
It gets extremely hot here. I'm talking so hot that I don't see how half this stuff survives, and mine's in an open pasture, so that that right there, that's why I have to use something artificial almost, and you have that naturally. Well, that makes sense.
I always talk about in classes I teach on the weekend about shade is sometimes, depending on how your setup is, it's almost a necessity. And I had a couple customers that come regularly, and they threw up a shade cloth over something that they had struggled with, and it just so happened to overlap some of their okra.
Oh, yeah.
And they said the okra that was under the shade cloth produced better than the one in the full sun. So it goes to prove that even plants that are the most heat and sun tolerant, give them a little less stress, a little more consistency, and they can thrive. So that was really an eye-opener for me when they came back and told me that. I was like, okay, this is cool. It was very, very cool.
Yeah, and a lot of times what we think of as full sunlight, people think if there's shadows there, it's not full sunlight, but they're not thinking of the reflective action of that sun striking that tree or that house or whatever, and it's reflecting back. It's actually getting longer full sun than what you may think just because there's shade looking in that area. It's still getting that light that's still going to grow, and so we get plenty of direct sun around here. I don't think it hurts at all as it gets hotter to use some shading techniques.
So you obviously grow far more tomatoes than I do. And to me, one of the biggest challenges at the end of the season, it's time to harvest. What the heck do you do with all yours?
Yeah, that's a bunch. I've had upwards 200 to 300 tomatoes at a time that I had to harvest. I just did that great, and you had a lot of determinate tomatoes and all that. So we do a lot of canning. If I didn't do that, I'd have to just give a bunch of them away. or or get into a farmer's market and sell some or
Yeah.
whatever. But we like canning, and tomatoes are so easy to can as opposed to pressure canning. You get the hot water bath
Yep.
can these, so it's a lot quicker. And we use tomatoes year round. I mean, just look at what you're cooking, this time of the year or whatever. It's nice to be able to get your quart jar of whole tomatoes, and then we make hot sauce, and we make spaghetti sauce.
That's what we primarily do. We make sauce.
Yeah, make sauces. They're easy to do. It's fun, But when you get that many at that time, it's a lot of work right then. You got to kind of have your stuff in order. You got to know what you're doing with canning. And she said, my wife said if I'd grow them and she'd can them, and I said okay, but I got to end up helping. That's a lot of work, but she does it, And like last year, I harvested about 800 tomatoes, and we got a pantry full of stuff.
That's awesome.
And then we share a lot. We give people fresh tomatoes. Have friends come by. I'll give them away.
I think that's
Bring
cool.
To church,
that's,
whatever.
That's what I remember the most about like when I was a kid, and both my grandfathers had big gardens. There was tomatoes everywhere, and it was like. And they just magically disappeared all the time.
Oh,
and I know they were sharing those with people. And like I think this one particular crop, more than a lot of others, is a great community contributor.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So
everybody likes fresh tomatoes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I bring them up to work. We bring them all. I always had tomatoes to share, and we had plenty to can, and then of course when you get homemade pecani sauce there or something, there's always somebody that needs a jar of that.
Oh, yeah.
And, but we'll actually run out of that, even as much as we do, we'll run out of that. That's a pretty popular item there. So, tomatoes is a great crop to grow and fairly easy to do.
The one thing that we didn't touch a whole lot on, I'm going to backtrack a little bit about two problems, because to me it's the most important problem.
Yeah.
You hinted about like stink bugs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I definitely want to kind of touch on that, because it's definitely the number one tomato problem that my clients come in with.
All right.
And, we talked about earlier how you plant early, in late February. And I think that's really important, because you're getting your plants in the ground, and you're beating those temperatures like we mentioned, not only for being able to actually pollinate the flowers and get fruit set, but if we can get them in early enough and get our production, usually you're going to see stink bugs set in like around so depending on the year, it could be I've seen them as early as late May, sometimes like June into mid-late June. And once those come on, they're really difficult to control. And even for somebody who is not an organic grower, there's not a quality chemical control that's just going to take care of the problem for you. And it just becomes a nuisance, because you lose a lot of your production, you get frustrated, and you wasted all this time. So I think like timing is everything in planting for that reason alone for me.
I've had a lot of experience with stink bugs, a lot of them. And 20 years ago, I tried some chemical application stuff like it didn't work.
And the chemical applications, if you really like dive into how it works, it's not much different than like home pest control. You obviously have to have something that is approved to go on an edible plant. But the thing that stinks about chemical control is not only is it just a toxin to something going into your edible tomatoes, but you put it on there, almost all pesticides are going to have a harvest interval time. So from the time you spray or put it on there, you're going to have to wait to actually harvest, so that there is a low enough toxicity left in that plant that's not going to transfer into the fruit. And by then, in stink bugs, being a multi-generational insect, you have to spray it directly on them to get it to kill them. And then 2 or 3 days later, there's a new batch and they're out there. So, and you just waited, now you could harvest, but I got to spray again. So it's this balance beam of what's going to work. And even though the chemical works in a sense, it doesn't work logistically for me. Like, I don't have time to get out there and spray. I don't want to, but it's difficult. And I think the only way to combat that is timing.
Yeah. That's the most important. I'm chemical free. I don't I'm completely organic. I hadn't used those chemicals in 20
If
years.
Aaron was here, Aaron would
Yeah.
he'd have to. He always says everything is a chemical.
Well, yeah. So,
but
okay, so neem oil, cold pressed neem oil.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my chemical.
yeah, that's
And that's the only thing I use on some things. But generally on stink bugs, I found a way to kind of control them. And I learned that every stink bug you kill this year, that's one less you're gonna have next year.
it's just it's just like disease, and
Yeah.
it stays in the soil. You know, if you
You're gonna have them. That's now. Do you want to reduce population? The easiest way to do it is when they're in a juvenile stage and they look like the little orange assassin bugs, but they'll be in clusters of 12 to 24.
Yep.
And you can spray soapy water on them then, and the soapy water just smothers them, kills them. And so early on, as soon as you start seeing those little critters like that, and if you knock them off the plants, you will find when it comes time for the adult stink bugs, you have very few.
yeah,
And if you stay after them, you can almost eliminate stink bugs.
that's
But you got to work at it. And I even got the little the bug vacuums and all that.
Yeah,
Make
that's
a
right.
game out of it. I go out there and I'm gonna get that little bug or whatever. You get up there and suck them in there.
that's
It's
my mom.
fun.
I got my mom. Just a old handheld vacuum.
Oh, yeah.
and she,
That works.
go out there and suck them up and take it out, dump it in some soapy water, and
Yep.
kill them off. Simple if you don't want to get your hands on them.
Yeah.
But because once they can become that adult, they've got that hard exoskeleton,
Yeah,
and
they'll almost cut your
yeah,
finger when you go to. But I carry a bucket. I got a little 3-gallon bucket I carry out there all the time with non-dish soap
Yep.
water, and I'll be plucking. But if I try to get them at that juvenile stage when they're very vulnerable. They don't have that hard exoskeleton, and you can kill them easy. Matter of fact, when you spray just soapy water on them with a spray bottle, they fall in the dirt, and you can pick them up then. A lot of times it just smothers them and kills them.
And I assume that'll only work in that juvenile
Yep,
stage.
they're little bitty. Yeah.
When they're
You can see them though. There's
yeah.
like whole crowds of them. They're moving around in unison.
Yep.
And you could just shoot them with a water hose, and it'd probably kill a lot of them. But soapy water smothers them, and then I noticed a significant reduction in the adult stink bugs.
Yeah,
after that.
I think if you definitely keep up after it and you do it season after season,
Yep.
and you're going to see, in your locale, in your area, a
Mhm.
reduction in the population.
Absolutely. So, and that's a good bug-free way to do it. And sometimes it's kind of fun. It's like
Yeah.
you're hunting something.
I mean, you have to make it fun, otherwise, it's
You wouldn't be out there doing
no,
that. Yeah.
So I guess as we wrap up,
Okay.
I have two last questions for you.
All right.
First, is there any other tips and tricks that you would suggest that have led you to more success that we haven't covered?
No, and I've seen all the wives' tales about plucking suckers and doing this and all that. No, there's not even any shortcut tips and tricks. No.
Okay.
But the number one, like we covered from the start, is get them out early as you can get them out, and put a good healthy plant out there, and keep them protected. When it's cool.
To me, that's have a way to protect them. I think
that's the key
is
to
super important.
Key to great, tomato plants and the healthy plants and strong plants. And one thing we didn't cover was when you're transplanting from your garage or your living room or wherever or greenhouse, is you got to make sure you're hardening those things off. You got to do that. And I usually try to do it within about a week's time when the weather gets settled out right. And for people who don't know, hardening off is acclimating these plants in a controlled environment to being outdoors. And so you do it a couple hours a day for a couple of days, and then a half a day, and then all day, and then towards the end of the 7 to 10 day period, you leave them out all night long.
All the time, yeah.
But I found that incorporating the fan or even rubbing your hand across the seedlings every day and getting those strong stems going, I think they harden really quick. I've actually rushed it after just 3 or 4 days and never had an issue with them. So I think.
And if you don't harden them off, then it can lead to transplant shock, and then what ends up happening, which this happens to me a lot because I'm always doing things on the fly.
You're out of town,
You put it out there, and then nothing happens for like a week or two, and it's like the plant's healthy, but it's not doing anything because it's in like preservation, survival mode, and acclimation mode. So taking that time to harden them off is important. And I always tell people that, you got to think about that plant like yourself. Come this weekend when it's 20 degrees outside.
We're not hardened off to that.
If I shove you outside of the door and lock the door and leave you out there, you're going to be real uncomfortable and you're going to be really unhealthy and sickly by the time you come back in. You're not going to thrive.
I'm not going to do no work.
So treat those plants like you would want.
That's right.
I always love analogies in a sense.
Yeah, that's a great analogy there, because I was thinking the same thing you're talking about, that we're fixing to get hardened off.
I've come to realize that growing most garden plants is often, there's a lot of things that, like, as a human, that we like, and plants like things, not the same things, but they like food and water the same way, consistent, regularly. They like to be comfortable, if there's no airflow and it's clammy. So it's just a very interesting thing. I often think about, if I'm not comfortable, that plant's not going to be comfortable.
Absolutely not.
So just an interesting thing. My last thing, I asked you this on the last episode, and I know what your number one is going to be, but give me your top 3 tomato varieties that you like to grow.
Brandywine.
I knew that was
coming. Brandywine. All right. Celebrity is one of them, and I have now grown to love one that's called Bella Rosa.
Okay.
And I've been planting that for about 4 or 5 years now. And a buddy of mine says, I want you to make sure you plant me nothing but Bella Rosas. And so I got to make sure I plant it. And it's just, it's like it's a whole lot like a celebrity with a little better flavor, and produces like crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good, nice medium tomato, and it does so well. So I got extra planted this year,
cool.
Or seeded, so we're going to see.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I've had great luck with them. So
awesome.
That's the 3 there: Brandywine, Celebrity, and Bella Rosa.
I'll have to try the Bella Rosa this
year. Yeah, you need to. They're really great.
Cool. I really appreciate you joining me today, and hope you guys got some good tips out of this. I know we were kind of all over the place, but there's so much to growing tomatoes. It's the most loved crop, but it can often be the most complicated one. So hopefully we gave you some things to help it not be complicated, and we'll see you next time on the Compost Pile.